Hello, my name is Bubs, I'm an artist, and I like to hear myself talk. And today, I'd like to hear myself talk about my really old original characters. Again, my first ever video for this channel was me clumsily explaining the process of me redesigning my oldest ever original characters, or really the first characters that were not self-inserts or fan OCs. There were definitely OCs in those categories before that. They were my first ever completely standalone OCs. I had a lot of fun making that video, and I will probably revisit those characters again on my channel eventually. I found a bunch more adjacent drawings when going through old notebooks for this video, so if you liked Leia and her gang, you might see more of them here soon-ish. Speaking of this video, I'm going to revisit some more really old OCs, because I think it would be fun to do a sort of series like this. I have a lot of really old OCs, only this time I decided to bite off more than I could chew. Not only did I choose a batch of characters that have followed along and evolved for the longest of any of my childhood OCs, meaning that they are needlessly complicated, but there are 12 of them. And I decided to do way more than just redesign them, but I will get into that later. Like, way later at the end. Now you have to watch the whole thing. Because this is my second go round and I learned from my mistakes of the first one, at least from a video construction standpoint, this will all be organized better. Which is to say, it will be organized at all. I'm going to start with a basic plot and premise overview before going into the individual characters, untouched. I want you to experience them in their natural habitat first, of course. Then I'll show you the process of me redesigning them, giving them a new premise, and tell you all about the project I still have ahead of me that you'll see in a part 2. I will probably be spending less time total on each of the individual characters compared to my last video like this, because, as I said, there are 12 of them, and I don't want this video to end up being 2 hours long because I'm doing a 2-parter already, and I do respect your time, at least to some extent. I am extremely excited for this. I've been drawing and planning for tens of hours over the last month, and I love these guys, and I love what I've done with them. So let me stop my obligatory way too long intro, get your refreshments, get your sketch pads, get your homework, and get comfy, because this is gonna be a long one. Let's go. We open in a world much like our own. A planet of green and blue where humans roam under the guise of free will, but just beyond the veil, their lives are designed and controlled by invisible forces. Angels and demons are always pulling the strings behind the scenes, subtly nudging the mortals into paths of light or darkness, and, of course, constantly warring with each other. Bloody battles are fought daily over who deserves the greater respect and power, who should have a larger say in the happenings of the mortal world. The prideful angels believe that the good they do is far more important than the duties of the equally prideful demons, who know that the good would not exist without demons cleaning up the nasty scraps left in the darker corners of the mortal world. The gods of life and death, the rulers of angels and demons, Vita and Mortem, grow tired of their timeless quarrel. They each send their most trusted companion to select 4 mortals that shall act as their champions, who will do battle in their name and determine who has the greater will. 4 pairs of mortals, each pair containing one touched by light and one touched by darkness, are wrested apart and forced to fight the one that was once closest to them, acting as puppets in a cosmic feud they cannot fathom. The fighting is brutal, the pain is immense, but they cannot resist. Their freedom has been taken from them, and all they can do now is fight. Or, something like that. As fun as it was to make that all cool and dramatic, that is not at all the most accurate representation of the vibes. That's the aspirational vibes. And the best I could do to try to slap together all of the different ideas I came up with over the many years I worked with these guys. It started with really no plot besides they are superheroes and also maybe My Little Pony inspired, and they fight. The whole god war with those Mortem and Vita people came quite a bit later, which I shall explain. At its inception, and yes, I have the definitive original drawings of all of them, minus one character, it was 5 pairs of people who were kind of foils that fought each other sometimes, but who mostly all seemed to be antagonized by Mortem, who was not yet written as the god of death. Or maybe he was. It was actually really hard to tell. Vita, though, didn't even exist yet, which actually shocked me and my older sibling when I was going through my old notebooks with them. Mortem and Vita, in both of our minds, were the respective leaders of the different factions of the Idiot Squad from the start, but I apparently completely made that up and have been lying to myself and others for over a decade now. Fun fact, these were all technically my siblings' characters at the start, which they asked me to draw for them way back in the day, and then I hijacked it from there because I guess I liked whatever the original setup was. So, technically, the only OC here that was completely my own is Vita, and I never liked him. Funny how that goes. By the way, my sibling is in fact very entertained to see what I've done and is definitely watching this, so hi, love you, hope you like the final product, smooches. After a while, I brought it down to 4 pairs of foils, had the other pair split to be the right-hand men of Mortem and Vita, and then everything kind of worked its way into the whole angel and demon thing, which as a concept stuck around the longest, but I constantly flip-flopped around on why the mortal people were involved in the god conflict, or in some cases, with each other at all. It got so complex eventually that I just tossed it all out and moved on to projects with less soup-adjacent plot lines, though I briefly, and I mean briefly, looked at it again about a year ago in college while trying to apply some kind of saving us from doomsday super team narrative with one character acting as a future-seeing mastermind to craft the one possible team that could save them, Doctor Strange Endgame style, kind of. That latest and greatest attempt came with some refreshing design takes that I actually ended up sticking pretty close to for this video, in all honesty. For some of them, anyways. Also, I think somewhere in all those rewrites, Mortem and Vita were like massive cosmic alien beasts and not creation gods. I did nothing with the concept and scrapped it immediately, but hey, it had potential. Those sorts of ideas have ended up shaking down into another story. Hi, Mina! The characters I am going to introduce you to, who I lovingly refer to as the Idiot Squad, followed me so long, so it's actually a very interesting way to see my progression as an artist and even as a person over the many years I worked with them. They already did get many a redesign, like so many over the years, so it's a nice showcase of my adapting art style and interests. You can also see my mental health improve slowly as I stopped using them for sloppy, plotless venting and tried to focus more on a purposeful narrative. The most interesting thing about these characters to me, though, the thing that makes them so near and dear to my heart, is that these are technically my first ever comic characters. I would fill up pages and pages and pages of the Idiot Squad doing nondescript actions and speaking illegible dialogue in tiny, not quite uniform, but definitely was supposed to be uniform, panels. It was nonsensical and overly edgy, like 90% of the time, but my passion for comics bloomed nonetheless. As time went on, I tried harder to make the characters more expressive and the dialogue less cringe. And also more legible, I also did that. Considering now one of my biggest reasons for making characters is to make comics, I feel it's only right to give these guys their due. Speaking of these guys, it's time to finally introduce the wonderful members of the Idiot Squad. For time-saving purposes, I'm going to introduce each character in their respective pair. This is partially because it's easier to discuss them together, since a lot of their traits and backstories are either shared or are inverted, kind of, so it's a time saver. But it's also because pairs of foils were really important to the vibes. It was one of the only aspects that never changed, and it's one of the things that I more or less tried to keep. Anyways, first up we have Mortem and Vita. Their names, in Latin, which I'm surely butchering, are the words for death and life, respectively, and they were the deity characters of the whole thing. They had the typical, we cannot exist without each other, and yet we are antithetical type of thing going on, which made them a very complicated pair of bros. They had a fondness for each other in many iterations, since they have always existed together since the beginning of time, before creation, and I guess you can only end up loving a person or hating a person if you are forced to stick together that long. They unfortunately ended up drifting apart as the world they created kept growing. It was growing between them, pushing heaven and hell out on opposite sides ever further, until eventually the distance took its toll and they began to fight. And if you have any interest in Greek mythology, which I did and took inspiration from, you know that fighting amongst gods is generally bad, especially when it's a family affair, and especially for anyone caught in the crossfire. In terms of characterization, I was a big fan of the imperfect god concept growing up, and still am, not gonna lie. Vita was always very reserved, patient, kind, just as he should be with his position, but it was to his detriment in some ways. He struggled to relate to the feelings of unease and pain because he did not experience them, which made it difficult for him to connect to the beings he brought life to. Meanwhile, Mortem was much more fiery and short-fused, wearing his emotions on his sleeve and refusing to play nice. Oh, honey. You know what? I'll take some water too. You're absolutely right, we need water. I also lost my spot. Whoops. Anyway. While he understood and could cater to the struggles of mortal beings, he also found himself far more generally resentful and unable to be an unbiased judge on important decisions. The personality dichotomy of calm nice and angry mean will be a theme, as you will soon see. Vita, however, was actually much more obnoxious to me as a character because of his impossibly positive and patient demeanor. So I just didn't really do anything with him because I made him unrelatable to me to fit what I thought an angel-creating god of life should be. That was the point, as stated before, but I literally never wrote about him, and it's honestly really funny. Which will also be a theme. Whoops. Mortem got way much more screen time and way more development, starting as a purely evil mini-bobini that just likes to spread chaos, darkness, and pain, though he eventually evolved into a sympathetic, well-meaning person forced to do a job that was chosen for him, with a good dash of resentment for being unfavorable by birthright. The dynamics of life getting all the credit for being the cool guy, while everyone fears and shuns death, were at play, of course. I definitely kept the My Little Pony fan character origins there. A real Celestia Luna situation. Or, you know, maybe a Zeus Hades thing, since I already mentioned Greek mythology. Only, I guess, Vita doesn't fuck everything, so maybe it's different. I don't know. There was actually a very interesting plot point in some version of the story where some main characters, specifically most of the quote-unquote dark side, were an offshoot of Mortem's attempt at creating life. Something he always envied Vita being able to do, but he could only ever make the body and never the soul, which resulted in a fucked up little guy, for lack of a better term. Anyways, that's the gist. I already talked for too long, so moving on. Next we have the right-hand men of Mortem and Vita, Nightfall and Dawnfire. They were actually more like the leaders of their different factions when I first made all the characters, or rather when my sibling made the characters, but that did not last long. Instead, Nightfall and Dawnfire landed in this weird area where they were sort of like children, or maybe pets of Mortem and Vita? I only say pets because they are technically critters, with Nightfall being a gargoyle and Dawnfire being a griffin, which in the lore I made acted sort of like animal companions or guides for demons and angels respectively. And yeah, there were a lot of additional gargoyles and griffins that I made, and they were all very important to the story. I think that one of the only things I ever did with Dawnfire story-wise was to give him a snuggly griffin boyfriend, actually, but they are not important to this video, because that would be too many characters. 12 is already too many, so for our purposes, they've been banished to the sun. They're gone. They're getting roasty toasted. Don't look at them. They're gone. These two were very close to their leaders / dads, and acted as confidants and advisors to them, having their complete trust. In terms of personality, it's pretty much the same case as with Vita and Mortem, with Dawnfire being the nice and calm one, and Nightfall being the hot-headed angry one. Dawnfire did actually have a little more nuance for his character, and that it was actually pretty easy to get under his skin, but he was always determined to keep that hidden, so he'd get all twitchy and force smiles while wanting to punch you. Despite that opening up a lot of opportunity for funny interaction, I never used him because his high and mighty and goody-goody persona really irritated me, and he was far less plot relevant than Vita, so why bother? I told you it was going to be a theme. He basically had nothing to work with for this project despite existing for easily a decade of my life. Speaking of that decade, Nightfall changed basically not at all in that time. Since day one, his character was just incredibly angry and rude and angry again, which is funny considering what I did for him for this video, but I will say I found that in my last attempt to independently reimagine them, I gave Dawnfire and Nightfall a sort of lovers on opposite sides of war thing, which actually seemed really cute. They seemed really soft and mushy together, and I really liked that. I did not keep it for this video because I had a very different vision, but yeah, good job me from like a year or two ago. Really cute. You good job. Next characters. This is our first pair of not heaven and hell guys. No supernatural shenanigans here. Eric and Jake. They are the youngest pair, and the youngest characters of this bunch, period, save one of them by a technicality. I believe Jake and Eric were 16 and 18 respectively at the start of the main plot. That's just the pair of numbers that sounds the most right to me. The most ironed out version of their story, at least according to the strongest of my memories, I wrote down so little for most of this, which is probably why the plot was soup, was that they were both lifelong best friends who both tried to enter some kind of really prestigious inventor education program, sort of like Big Hero 6. They were working on a project together that was, if you couldn't tell from some of the images, a non-Marvel sanctioned Iron Man suit, with the intention of it being used for emergency response types of things. Flying around in a metal suit to save people from the rubble of an earthquake does actually sound awesome, but realistically the government would probably use it for war instead. Kind of an opposite Iron Man origin if you think about it. Anyways, Eric was always the smarter and more charismatic one compared to Jake, who was incredibly timid, clingy, and even paranoid. Very jealous too. Which is funny, because originally they both had the exact same personality, that being, hey, look at me, here's a cheesy one-liner, ba-boom! Yeah, it's shit personalities, basically what I'm saying. I think I ended up changing it to fit that opposite pairing foily type of dynamic, and also because I can't write good one-liners to save my life. Obviously, I just demonstrated that I am really bad at that, so, yeah. Focusing up again, Jake eventually started to get worried that getting this opportunity would mean that Eric would kind of ditch him, as he already fit in way better with the teachers and other inventors in the program than he seemed to with Jake. So he purposefully sabotaged the thing that they were working on to make it unsafe to operate. Jake tried to show the sudden strange mishap to Eric the morning of the showcases, but Eric was so desperate to show his stripes that he went ahead with their presentation anyways, saying he trusted Jake's positive checks from the night before. He gets suited up and goes on stage, and to cut to the chase, Jake accidentally and indirectly exploded his best friend in front of everybody they respected and caused him to become permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Eric, ever a tenacious guy, ended up developing neurally linked braces that would allow paralyzed people to walk, all from the hospital, which allowed him to join the program anyways, while Jake hid from everyone, never willing to face his actions for fear of the truth coming out and his friend hating him forever. Though his ghosting certainly didn't make Eric happy when he was suffering alone in the hospital. I guess jail was also scary to Jake. That's kind of the gist, but I will give a little more on Eric because he is one of my absolute favorites of this bunch. Eric, if I'm recalling correctly, was genuinely my first ever, for sure, officially bi character. Him being, like, openly queer was really, really important to me when I was writing him, and in hindsight, it makes sense why. I love boobs. All sizes of boobs. Big boobs are fantastic. That one is free to kill me. Once I got a better handle on how character writing goes and stopped trying to make him Iron Man, he became this wisecracking teen, bringing in a lot of relatable to me angst and sass, as well as being more of an everyman, at least compared to the rest of the cast. He reacted to things realistically and was a reasonable amount of kind or rude when a situation called for it. Plus, I just liked the idea of a kid having the worst happen to him and still being able to find a positive. It was nice. Next guys, Nathan and Tommy. I will be honest, this is the pair that I did the absolute least with over the years. My thing with the pairs is that they were all supposed to be linked together by some shared tragedy. That was important to the plot and themes or something, at least once I really got into a rhythm with these guys and thought about stuff like themes. But Nathan and Tommy didn't ever really click. Like, Nathan is this grumpy, no-nonsense war vet that sometimes had a family and sometimes was a complete loner, while Tommy started off as a Jeff the Killer knockoff and ended up as a random smiley ghost baby with no explanation as to why he was a smiley ghost baby. I think there was one timeline where Tommy was actually Nathan's son, who was unfortunately taken and, well, harmed, and Nathan never got him back. You know, because FNAF came out and consumed my mind. But I literally already did a deceased family narrative with a different character, plus the dead child thing was a little too needlessly dark for my britches at the time, so I ended up scrapping it. But that just meant they were back to not having any real connection with each other. They also each had no discernible personality besides gun and smile, or maybe knife, so I did not have a lot to work with here. That also meant I had pretty much complete freedom to do with whatever I wanted, so the ups and downs. Oh yeah, and Tommy is the character that I said is youngest by a technicality. I think his last alive age was 8 or something, so that is where he is mentally and physically, if physically applies to a ghost. But he has been a ghost for a lot longer than that. Still a kid though. The little baby, tiny baby. Moving right along, we have Victor and Sylvester, which I commonly shorten to Vic and Cy, and will now on occasion, because it's easier to say sometimes. They were always my favorite pair. Maybe not individually my favorite characters, but definitely my favorite pair. They started as a really flamboyant, joyful magician and a criminally insane, violent magician who had a weird respect for each other but obviously clashed a lot still. As time went on, though, they actually became very complex individually, and in a lot of ways, the most wholesome pair of the bunch, which all stemmed from the fact that I made them brothers. Their backstories are super long and convoluted, but the most basic version is that Vic and Cy grew up together in a family that was either a blended family or a family where Vic was adopted in after his parents, who were family friends to Cy's, died. It flip-flopped between those explanations a lot. They grew up very close as bros, and both developed an interest in entertaining and magic, so they started a little magician business where they would perform at kids' parties. They had a cute act where Vic was kind of a mysterious type that would constantly be annoyed by Cy ruining the mystery with being overly excited for their tricks. They also had bunnies, which I still love, named Chap and Patch, and I think that the naming scheme is still really cute. Pat my little baby self on the back for that. Eventually, the business fell apart when Vic started to have some serious mental health struggles, and then, how to put this delicately, you can't. Not good things happened to his pregnant wife. He is the character that already had the deceased family narrative. Yeah. Vic's mental health only worsened until Cy checked him into a mental hospital against his will. Because of that, he and Cy lost touch. Though being at the facility was actually really helpful to Vic, and he ended up regretting the terms they left off on. Of all of them, their difficulties in bond were the most grounded in reality, so that's definitely a really big W for them. Their personalities could be most succinctly described as happy and sad, but both of them ended up being among the most reluctant participants of this good versus bad war thing. Cy had a family to worry about and didn't want to fight his brother, and Vic just wanted to be left alone and also didn't want to fight his brother. I really liked that even in circumstances where they were pitted against each other, they could never bring themselves to truly hate the other because their brotherly bro love was just that strong. Bro love wins, truly. Finally, the last pair. Charlamagne and Theodore. These two are the resident wizards and Brits of the Idiot Squad, with Charlamagne being an ice wizard and Theodore being a fire mage. Now, most of the time, the backstory was that Theodore apprenticed under Charlamagne until Charlamagne cast him out for being too weak, but there were also versions of the story where their only link was that they were both wizards. Womp womp. Looking back on them is the funniest of all the pairs because of how uneven the attention they got was. One of them, Theodore, can have his entire personality and backstory summed up in one phrase. kind, shy druid. I never used him because he was boring to me, but that just meant he never got developed, so he stayed boring. There was a bit of him being an ultimate sassmaster towards Charlamagne in some drawings, but most of the time he just either wasn't present or he was shrinking away from confrontation. He was never doing anything that would indicate much of a personality, and I did the whole shy wizard thing better in other stories of mine. Charlamagne, or Charlie as I so affectionately call him despite him canonically despising said nickname, is the opposite, and is actually so chock full of lore that I am dizzy. Basically, he was from this wizard dimension, where he was king of the wizards, but the wizard dimension had some kind of terrible tragedy happen to it. His people sent him to safety in a desperate bid to protect their king, but as such, he was the sole survivor. He grew bitter and cold in his loneliness and started to use forbidden magics to travel all around different dimensions and times, trying to find a way to rewrite history, but no matter what, the tragedy was always to happen. I think in at least one version of the story, the tragedy was actually caused by him doing all the forbidden magic, which is a weird time paradox that I don't want to think about right now, because that stuff hurts my nog. I had a surprisingly decent documented timeline of his wanderings. I think that I honestly could have made him the main character, and my reworking of the story could have been him encountering all the others in different time periods and worlds, which would have easily explained why there is such a diverse cast that doesn't go together, and now that I say it out loud, I should have done that, but it's too late now. It would have been way too convoluted anyways, realistically. Knowing me, I tried dedicating like a month to developing each individual dimension alone, and this would literally never get done. He eventually ended up with the other idiots, where he decided to give up on his quest and then mentored Theodore. Also, if I'm fully honest, he probably was, and kind of still is, my favorite of the originals, which might be obvious from how much I gave to him in terms of story. Strange note, though, of all of them, he had the most, tension with other characters. He had the highest frequency of getting flirted with or even kissed by other characters, and even had quite a bit of suggestive art from my high school and college days. Not showing that, but I have seen things. Charlie's thing, specifically. Heh, that was terrible, I'm so sorry. Now that I am finally done with introductions, we shall be boogieing along to the actual changes. I thought it would actually be kind of fun to start by showing off the most hectic but also most important part of any complicated project of mine, especially if I'm trying to improve something that already exists. Goal setting. I am the friend that people are surprised to hear has never been officially diagnosed with ADHD, which is to say it is a very dangerous game to be letting my ideas only live in my head. I forget things, I mix things up, I constantly sidetrack myself in terms of what actually needs to get done. So, to combat this, I make checklists, I make big concept boards, I start just screenshotting a bunch of images that inspire me, I make random notes to myself on my phone and in my sketchbooks and on my iPad. I thought it would be kind of fun to show you some of that, partially because it's funny, and partially because I want to show you that planning is not always the clean series of graphs and mood boards that you might see elsewhere. I feel like a lot of the time when people talk about or show off organization and preparation, everything is super sleek and orderly and neat. This obviously makes sense, because it is organized. I'm not arguing against that because that would make me a big dumbhead. However, preparing for something can also look a mess and make no sense to most people, but still be functional to you, and learning that has actually made me leagues more efficient in my planning stage. I used to try really hard to make the stuff that no one would realistically see just as refined as stuff they would, but all it did was slow me down and make me very frustrated. It reminds me of how growing up, I hated when we had those note or planner checks in school. I was the one that would review the notes and the planners, so why do I have to devote all this mental energy to making my handwriting legible to other people, or make sure that I'm using language or making references to things for other people, or make sure I'm writing down enough things according to other people, while I'm already devoting so much mental energy to just pay attention. That was a side rant for sure, but my point is, allow your thoughts to be messy sometimes, if that's what works for you. If you're the type of person that wants to use a cork board, or a bunch of sticky notes, or just a big pile of scribbles, that's Great. Your notes only have to work for you. Also, I find the less time you spend making your plan perfect, the easier it will be to change it if you come up with something better down the line. Planning is important, but don't go down the path of over-planning, or you'll literally never even start. I'm about to let the speed paint start now while I interpret all the nonsense I just threw up on the screen for you. I will talk about the changes I made that were unique to each character once I get to the individual character portraits in a bit, so for now I'm just going to be talking general. Otherwise this video really would be 2 hours long. You will unfortunately be noticing me swapping between Procreate time-lapses and actual screen recordings a couple times, because I lost several hours of footage due to some hot garbage nonsense courtesy of Apple. Sorry about that, but it is what it is. Without further ado, let me walk you through the process of how I turned a story about angels and demons warring for supremacy into a story about a bunch of petty assholes that form a seedy 1920s circus act. So, I had about 3-ish major goals for my redesign, and they go as follows. 1. Make the scope smaller and simpler in terms of plot and backstories. I often get carried away with myself and turn the molehill into a mountain when it comes to lore. I like big, complex backstories and world building, but this story necessitated a cast. Really? I love you, but right now, gotta be honest, I love you a little less. That was a cute yawn, though. I like big, complex backstories and world building, but this story necessitated a cast of way too many fucking characters. Oh my god, the amount of side characters that were all insanely important to the plot for some reason gave me a migraine all on its own, I'm sure. If you think 12 characters is crazy, add on another 12 for each of them, and that's looking closer to how many stupid idiot babies I had in the idiot baby jail, and I apparently needed all of them to be equally as developed and complex as the main cast. More than if you consider how underdeveloped some of the main cast actually was. On top of that, I'm already trying to organize an ensemble cast and make you actually care about all of them, somewhat. So having such a big story makes it really hard to keep everyone on track. So kick out the giant cosmic entity plot lines and let that just live with Mina over there. That's her thing. 2. Make everybody be a part of the same team. I could not for the life of me deal with the complex webs of connections and rivalries and all that between these characters, or come up with an interesting justification as to why they are both working alongside each other and against each other so inconsistently. So it is not only easier for me to just have them all exist in one big group, but it is also just more fun because everyone gets to interact with each other more often. What's the point in a giant cast if they don't all get to bounce off of each other? Obviously, this could be done with 2 teams present, but this is easier. I'm allowed to take the easy route because I already made this needlessly difficult for myself. There will still be some tension between some of the characters, but the rivalries shall be petty. 3. Improve the diversity. I had a mix of humans of all ages, wizardy elf people from alternate dimensions, and supernatural entities with horns and wings and shit, yet I could not tell them all apart for the life of me. I read far too many panels of these ancient comic pages, completely confused if I was looking at Nathan, or Eric, or Vita, because at some points they all had the exact same hair and clothing, and I wasn't good enough at dialogue to make them actually speak differently. It didn't help that I forgot to draw Vita's wings and Nathan's scar and 5 o'clock shadow a lot, but that's beside the point. I also constantly got Nightfall and Mortem confused because they were literally the same guy except they had a different eye color. Exacerbating all of this was that everybody either had like a buff body or a not buff body, and that was kind of it, including the literal ghost child, because I didn't know how to make child proportions different. This is all ignoring the fact that the sameness extends to their personalities as well. Several of them have personalities that are just indistinguishable from each other, so I wanted to push out of that. You may have even noticed, if you were looking at my notes, that I was not a fan of the fact that they were all men. I want more diverse backgrounds, personalities, gender expressions, and physical appearances to play around with because, I don't know, I just think it's more fun and interesting that way. This is all about things that I think I do better now, and I think diversity is one of those things that I do in fact do better now. Now, my starting point to address these issues was to completely remove any supernatural or superhero-y or magical aspects of the story. That was a hard decision for me because, for the purposes of this self-imposed challenge, I would have preferred to stick as close to the original prompt as possible. That's what I tried to do with Alea, but at the same time, I felt that the decision here came down to following along with a really rough road or actually making things more coherent. The fact of the matter is that the original concept had a ton of extremely different characters. Again? Well, she's spoken. It's water time. Drink your water, people. Drink your water with me and my rat. Why are you so thirsty? The fact of the matter is that the original concept had a ton of extremely different characters with frankly incompatible origins and rules of their abilities. Genuinely, I was constantly writing rules for myself and then immediately breaking them. For example, Charlie's backstory, which I developed over a very long period of time, literally made no sense, because Mortem and Vita's creation was supposed to be like the only one, the only world, so multiple dimensions do not actually exist in the confines of the universe I made for myself. Also, as I said earlier, the more complex the plot, the harder it is going to be to organize all these characters and develop them properly, so grounding them more in reality really helps out with that. So I decided to sacrifice some of the original ideas in the pursuit of a coherent premise. They are all boring human beings now. Boo. Sorry, not sorry. The next step was to figure out their new reasons for being together. They weren't together because of literal gods pushing them there, or even a time wizard trying to prevent the apocalypse, so why are all these different kinds of people coming together? I wanted to maintain as much of their backgrounds as I could since I was already deleting some major ideas, but it was initially kind of a struggle to actually figure out how to get such a diverse group of people together. Just to name a few, I had a scholar, an inventor, man with gun, baby with knife, 2 washed-up party magicians, and a depressed child. At first, I thought of the idea of an assassin agency because it's actually kind of an idea I've wanted to do for a really long while. I love the morbid humor you can get from it, but I ended up not liking the idea. It was great to maintain a lot of these different skill sets, you know, gun, knife, everybody else is kind of good at fighting, but I just didn't think that it was the direction I wanted to take for these particular characters. So the solution for me was as it always is. Take a shower. If my creativity has hit its capacity of independent brainstorming, taking inspiration from other pieces of media, and talking things out with other people, letting my mind just kind of wander in the shower is usually the place where everything finally clicks. And it did. And even better, I recorded my click moment, which I do sometimes when I feel like talking rather than writing or drawing. So here is that little voice recording. Apologies in advance for the bad audio.
I think that the way to get all of this to work, because they all have different skill sets and they all have different, specialties and everything, and they are all able to do like these crazy things. Eric is supposed to be really athletic and this is track star, and then we've got a bunch of magical people that can do magic, and I was trying to figure out how to make all of this work, and I just thought if I took that and I changed it so that they're all just people to make it simpler, because I legitimately need to make it simpler, but if I just make all of them people and then I make them performers and I put them in a circus, it totally makes sense, because then we have the knife person and we have a gun person, so they can do, throwing knives and sharpshooting kind of things, and then Eric and Jacob could be like trapeze or something, or just like gymnast kind of people, and then I guess Theo and Charlie would do magic, and then I could kind of figure out the other ones eventually, but that's the starting point. And I think I'll probably put it in the 50s or something like that. I don't know. I want Nathan to still be a war vet, so I'm actually probably going to pick the era based off of that. I need to refresh myself about the timing of old-timey wars and figure out which one would be the better one for what I'm trying to get across. Plus the aesthetics. I kind of also been toying with the idea of like the 20s, because I think that would make it possible for him to have gone through World War I. So maybe, I don't know. We'll see. Am I remembering that wrong? I'm probably remembering that wrong. It's too late. I have to leave. It's too late. I have to go to bed. Bedtime.
Yeah, apparently that was from 11:29 p.m. I usually go to bed at 10, though I don't always sleep by then, and I usually shower long before that. I don't know what I was doing that kept me up. I hadn't started playing Dredge again yet, so it was not the call of the ocean. We will never truly know. Regardless, I started adapting everybody according to that thought. Hopefully it is somewhat clear that I settled on 1920s America for my setting because, despite my doubts, Nathan could have served in World War I if the story took place in the 20s. I like to take inspiration from time periods, but don't always aim for perfect accuracy. This is due to a combination of liking to fudge things in order to limit myself less, and understanding that a lot of what we see records of from those time periods are skewed. Photography was not as easily accessible in the 1920s as it is nowadays, and even when keyword searching specifically for references of garments that lower-class individuals would wear, which is where my characters would be, I was still treated to very fancy and put-together-looking people. The closest I saw to anything on the shabbier side was pictures of farmers in work clothes. Does that count? I don't know. This is completely ignoring the other many groups of people that probably never got their stories told because people didn't want pictures of them. People wanted to photograph able-bodied pretty people and had a narrow definition of what that meant. It's really sad, but it's just how things went, unfortunately. As you can see, I decided to sketch everybody in their pairs for the initial rough pass of the redesigns. I did this for a few reasons, but it was mostly because I wanted each of these pairs to still be really connected to one another in some way, either due to friendship, similar acts, and/or some kind of visual similarity. I actually stayed fairly close to the original designs of all the humans, as well as their rough ages, because, again, I was already changing a lot. I also gave them all the same name, except for a couple of them. Mortem and Vita now have those names as stage names, with their actual names being different, and Dawnfire and Nightfall got completely different names. Their new stage names are Apollo and Noir, respectively. I still wanted to keep the day and night theme thing a little, and then their actual names became Julius and Marion. Oh yeah, and some of them got the name changes because they got hit with the woman beam. I think I played Mortem and Vita first, but I'm not actually talking about them. They actually both still identify as men, and their act is drag. Vita specifically has some additional nuance, but I'll get there later. Theodore is now Theodora, and Tommy is now Tabby, short for Tabitha. Maybe not the most creative, but yeah. The circus concept I went with is actually something I have always wanted to play around with, but never got around to. I have always loved things where something looks really nice and fun on the outside, but is actually really dangerous and rugged under the surface, which is what I'm doing. And I am always down for the found family trope. I decided everyone would be kind of orphaned or otherwise ostracized from their families, and so the circus is the closest thing to a family that they have anymore. I thought it would be a great way to set up some interesting relationship dynamics among the characters, and would also give them some common ground because they didn't necessarily have that in their original forms, to their detriment. Anyways, my idea is that they are all part of this super seedy circus called the Freak Show, which has been my codename in my notes for this project for a while. I guess it just stuck. It's a collection of a bunch of taboo types of people and acts, at least for the time period, and serves as a hub for non-socially acceptable activities like gambling, drugs, alcohol, doing the gay. You know, stuff that 1920s Prohibition America did not like. For the actual story, I decided that it would largely follow Eric, who shows up and politely asks Victor, who is really the main man behind the business, to join, because he's always wanted to perform, and he has always wanted a family. Aw. Vic reluctantly agrees since they recently lost one of their members, and Eric finds out pretty quickly that he joined a very toxic family that are largely not keen on accepting new members. However, Eric is an optimistic guy, and he continues on trying to make this work. Hilarity and hijinks ensue. It is both way simpler and still way more interesting than my experience trying to interpret all my notes from before. It is also kind of nice to have something of a definitive main character, kinda, since while everyone is still really important and will be treated pretty much equal, I have one guy to fall back on as a point of perspective. Plus, his nature as an everyman from his origins made him a good audience placeholder. For colors, I actually made a color palette using picks from the original character references for the funsies. I have been creating color palettes to use for my big projects ever since I first watched Hilda, and ever since I found out how easy it is to do in Procreate. But I just also think it's a great way to unify characters that are all over the place. My goal was to simultaneously make them more different and more cohesive, so colors really helped me out. I will probably show me doing the color picking, or I probably already did, and then adjusting as I realized I need more lights, darks, and neutrals. At some point, I also made adjustments because I didn't really have any good purple tones. I wanted the palette to be heavy on the red, the orange, the blue, and the yellow, with everything else more washed out. This was partially because I wanted it to stand out from the other palettes I've made so far, and partially because I think it's best representing the characters in their original forms. I think I did a good job kind of reinterpreting everyone's color palette based on the new colors and their new personality quirks and everything. I especially really like how your eyes are immediately drawn to Vita because of how bright that yellow is. I wanted her to be big and loud and demanding of your attention, so I'm glad that the colors help with that. I actually really like how much variation I end up with the body types too. Everyone looks unique, and that's exactly how I wanted it to go. I wanted all of them to have a very different silhouette, and I feel that I have achieved that goal, and that it would be the case if I did references with everybody in their undies. That cape on Charlie is actually hiding the widest hips to ever come from London, and there are a lot of characters that are a little bit more on the chunky side, which is something that I was very wary of doing when I didn't really have the best grasp of anatomy. I will not be mixing these guys up now, that is for sure. So, on to the individual changes. Finally, I'll go down the list in the order that they've appeared in the lineup to just make things easier for everyone. First, we have Mortem. Turning the gods into drag queens was honestly one of the easiest things for me to figure out, oddly enough. I always played around with gender when it came to them. I have a lot of gender-swapped drawings of them, and I just gave them both very feminine designs at times, especially Vita, so I felt like it kind of made sense. Plus, a drag duo felt like a great way to maintain an opposite vibe type of thing, with a dark, macabre kind of character and a boisterous, jovial one to match. Mortem, specifically here, now named Winston, is a drag queen and dancer. Madame Mortem is his persona, and she is this sassy and mysterious diva that loves wearing expensive furs and rare gemstones. She's a flirt, but a Black Widow type, a real man-eater that many have tried and failed to tie down. Winston probably isn't too much different in personality from the persona, being very quick on his reads with a wandering eye. He likes handsome, rich men and getting attention from them, but not necessarily enough to commit. I felt like it was kind of refreshing for me, since my typical romances are, we fall in love forever and nothing can change that. I wanted to have romance in this story, but complicated and challenging, for me at least. It's my understanding that a lot of drag queens can be very different from their personas as well, often being that the drag persona is a lot more confident than they really are, which I think fits with Mortem's original story pretty well. He is this god of death with all these legions of demons at his command, but he is really just terrified that he will never measure up to his brother and is insecure of his birthright. So Winston is probably a little more shy and reserved and spends most of his time in his train car alone, just sewing. Oh yeah, I want them to have their own train, even if that's not practical at all. That just fits with the circus vibe, I guess. Yeah, anyways, I imagine that he'd make his own clothes to fit his body, and would do the same for Vita. Drag is a very DIY hobby, industry, or lifestyle nowadays, and this would even more so be the case back in a 1920s setting. I also like the idea of Mortem being the kind of patch-up person for everybody, since they are kind of under the radar and prefer to hang out in more secret settings. Side note, if for some reason you think drag doesn't fit in a 1920s Harlem setting, you need to do some research. As far as bonds go, I like to imagine he is closest to Vita, who is the only person Winston actually opens up around. But I also like to think he's fairly close to Victor and Noir, formerly Nightfall, partially because of new story ideas, but also to keep some leftovers from the original story. Also, he probably hates Apollo, formerly Dawnfire, with a burning passion, for the same reasons. On to Vita, we have another drag queen, this time with a much more comedic vibe. She has a sassy aunt kind of persona who always tries to give you kind of shady advice, but she generally means well, and her main act is performing musical comedy. This design was the one I was actually the least sure about of all of them, despite how easily the drag queen idea came to me. Making the formerly tall, slim-fit nothing man into a short and chunky one full of personality, it was a big change. But considering I actually like her as a character now, this was for the best. Plus, I liked how the new build really pushed the contrast between her and Mortem, and I always liked the idea of a life god or goddess being thicker since it comes across as bountiful and full, which I think anyone might associate with life. I do, anyways. Yeah, also, I originally was going to give just a very curvy body shape due to being short and chubby, but I eventually decided I wanted him to actually have breasts. I was kind of trying to play on the opposite of those bearded ladies from real-life quote-unquote freak shows. Rather than a woman presenting with masculine traits, here's a man presenting with feminine traits. Woo! Vita actually ended up being all about subverting things, since I also wanted her to have the opposite body type of the typical 1920s flapper girl. Ultimately, I decided I wanted him to be intersex. I specifically had in mind Klinefelter syndrome, which is predicted to occur in about 1 out of 500 AMAB individuals, though it is also predicted to be terribly underdiagnosed. In the most basic terms, people with Klinefelter syndrome have 2 X chromosomes and 1 Y chromosome, which is an abnormality from the typical XX or XY. Chromosomes and genes are messy, and stuff like that happens way more than you might think. One common symptom of this chromosomal condition is gynecomastia, which is a condition where AMAB individuals develop enlarged breast tissue, as one may see in AFAB individuals at puberty. So I gave my character toddies, and you can't do anything about it because of science. I think that this really helps integrate Vita into the new theme of all the characters being kind of outcast for different reasons, and the circus allowing them to turn their reason for social exclusion into a strength and a draw. I think that it's really what the circus was historically, though I wanted to steer away from the traditional gawking kind of thing and make it more positive and wholesome. I imagine that Vita probably identifies more with her persona and prefers people to kind of see her as feminine, though still a man, and also that's mostly just because she hates her actual legal name, Bartley. I also imagine she's a very huggy and warm figure for everybody, but to parallel Vita's original shortcomings, isn't the best at dealing with emotions when stuff gets really real. She's the fair-weather friend type, I guess. Except for with Mortem. Next up is Eric. Eric is one of the least changed of the bunch from both a design and character writing perspective, but since the appearance of him really just had the thought process of make him look the same except in a new style and also like an orphan boy from the 20s, I will spend my time here just telling you his new story since it is much more fleshed out compared to anybody else at the moment. Eric, in his original story, as I even mentioned in my very sleepy voice clip from earlier, was written as this athletic track star, mostly to add to the tragedy of his being blown up, if we are all honest with ourselves. However, for my purposes, that made his transition into an acrobat very natural. I imagine that he was a refugee from Mexico, but his parents weren't unable to stay with him for reasons I have admittedly not completely worked out. Regardless, he grew up in and out of orphanages, constantly running away and getting into dangerous odd jobs at factories or as a chimney sweep until he would inevitably be dragged back to the orphanage again. His dangerous jobs left him scarred, both mentally and physically, but also gave him skills like flexibility, agility, and a knack for mechanics and tinkering. This all made him a potential asset to a circus with an opening for a flyer and a constant need for tech repair. I imagine that once he finally aged out of the orphanage circuit, he kind of just happened upon the freak show and enjoyed how it served as a haven for people that don't belong elsewhere, and he fell in love with the place. One night, he sneaks his way to the behind-the-scenes area of the circus and begins asking around to determine who is in charge, before eventually being directed towards Victor. He asked to join, and Victor reluctantly agreed under the condition that he wouldn't get any cash until he started making some. He eventually earned the nickname Birdie for his quick learning of trapeze flying and becoming a big name for his willingness to really push himself in terms of stunts, which harkens back to his original story. Eric has always been a very determined and even bullheaded character throughout his existence, pushing himself far past his limits regularly, so I thought it would fit this young man trying to make a name for himself in a circus. However, one thing he is very wary of is fire. He has trauma related to fire. I wanted to keep some aspect of the whole explosion-based trauma, so I just adapted it to fit the new setting. Other than that, his personality is pretty much the same, where he is outgoing and tries to get along with everyone, but will also speak out if you're being a douche, though maybe he's a little less sassy and confrontational overall. I gave him more lore-accurate insecurity from being a teenager with an unstable childhood. Oh, and I decided he likes lemon bread. That was actually a running joke in his story for a long while, where he was obsessed with lemon bread. I think it had something to do with the fact that he would always order it at the coffee place his crush worked at, and it gave him an excuse to be there consistently even though he hated coffee. Thought it would be a funny nod to the OG story, I don't know. Next is Jacob, who is now Jacob with a K and not Jacob with a C. Jacob, with a K, didn't have his appearance change much, but he is very different character-wise. Rather than being this clingy, meek, sad character, I wanted him to embody teen angst to the max degree. I kind of ended up giving all the anger and angst of the OG Mortem and Nightfall to him, now that I'm looking back on it. He is angry all the time, with a hairpin trigger, because I think it is more understandable and therefore less annoying to come from a literal child than from fully grown adults. I also decided I wanted him to be an immigrant as well, to help give he and Eric some common ground, only he comes from Slovenia. For some reason, I have always been amused by the trope of that one European character who just randomly mentions these horrific experiences that they've had to try to relate to the others, but it's just such a bizarre and uncomfortable lore drop that is just absurd. The whole, that reminds me of the time a bear ate my uncle type of thing. Obviously, I don't like it when it's, explicitly racist, but yeah. I think it would allow Jacob to be kind of a comedic entity, since I want the new story to better balance the dark themes and the comedy, since I feel that was what I was always kind of going for, but never really pulled it off. I decided to make him a contortionist because circus. I'll be honest, a lot of my motivations for making Jacob the character that he is was to simply make me like him, so I started throwing random stuff at the wall. I only liked the original Jake to the extent that he built Eric's story out. I wanted him to have agency in his own life this time. The one idea that I still liked was him kind of being an outcast of his own making, even in a group of people that would love and accept him no matter what. Or at least not despise him in these cases. His bad attitude probably keeps him isolated from everybody else, and their dislike of him confirms his idea that everyone is out to get him no matter what. This would set up a really nice potential friendship with Jacob and Eric down the line, as Eric expresses that he will never give up on him, which is reminiscent of their original bond. At the start, though, I would write him to be incredibly jealous of Eric and all the positive attention that Eric was receiving, also in line with his original character and story. I haven't written a lot for him yet, though, if I'm honest, but that feels very in character for me with Jake. After Jacob is Victor. Holy shit, okay, Victor might be my new favorite. I always liked him a ton in his previous iterations, but now I, really like him? So, he actually had this really complicated backstory that I neglected to tell you, where he would get possessed by a demon who was also his dad in some version of the story when he was in danger. His normal personality was very sad, shy, and reserved, but when he got possessed, he was incredibly energetic, maniacal, and slap-happy. Think the Joker. When I decided on having he and his brother be closer to circus clowns, I decided pretty quickly on a sort of happy-sad dynamic with the two of them. And then I thought, why not flip his personalities? Have the sad persona be an exaggerated act, and have the actual character be the more wacky, crazy one. I was originally going to play it at the extreme, but I decided to dial it back to allow Victor to be a weirdo, but a fairly level-headed one, with a knack for business. He is absolutely bonkers, but I pictured him more as a low-energy, grunkle Stan type of character, more than a Joker type. You know, more goofy and well-meaning, but still very self-serving and anarchist. I imagine that he is an expert social engineer, a skill that has been hard-won through years of getting stamped down by the world due to prejudice and racism, and allowed him to get his company together, and it has allowed him to continue to operate without getting into much legal trouble. I imagine that he and Sylvester grew up in the same orphanage and were very close, like brothers, and always dreamed of making a name for themselves. Sylvester acts as kind of the outward face of the business, while Victor runs all the logistics and numbers and decision-making behind the scenes. The only other major thing of note for now is that I decided Noir, formerly Nightfall, is actually his child, though I am honestly still flip-flopping on whether this is due to adoption only or because of some scandalous activities as a younger teen. Either way, he adores that kid. Victor's physical appearance stayed much the same, though there was a greater attempt to actually give him closer to a curly or afro texture of hair. He kind of seemed to have wavier hair later on in his design changes anyways, but looking back, I feel like it was just such a missed opportunity to actually have different hair type. Everyone has this very limp, sad, draped over their head hairstyle for the vast majority of their existence, including Victor. Part of it was because it was a comfort zone thing, but I try not to let that be an excuse for myself anymore. So I'm going for some cute curls this time, but Vic still usually slicks it down to fit with the style of the time. I really like that I kept his eyes blue, since in addition to being iconic to his original design, I really liked the way that the red and pink tones contrasted with the blue. I think that little pop of color was just, so good. Also, I was thinking that the cane I gave him, while definitely partly for the aesthetics, was actually because he has kind of a bum leg. That may be because of my perfectly healthy obsession with a different character of the same name. I'm gonna play that stupid fucking part there where I started being like, Jess. Victor. Jess. Jess. Why did you do it, Jess? Why did you put me in this moves, Jess? Jess, what? I need to go to bed. Fuck. He says it like that. He goes, Jess. Kiss me, Jess. Next is Sylvester. He's probably the one that changed the absolute least. He is still bubbly and jovial and close to Victor. He still has a cute, hairy dad bod, only now I took away his family. Whoops. It was to fit again with the circus is my family kind of theme. I have considered giving him his wife and kids back, though, and have them kind of travel along with the group as they perform, because I do remember really liking the character of his wife from his original story, and it would be cute, but the cast is already so bloated with people that I'm expecting you to keep tabs on, and I don't want her to stick around only to act as an accessory to a man on my cast. I might just have her be a person that shows up a lot, and they're kind of flirty back and forth. I may actually change my mind and work the wife and kids in by the time my part 2 comes out, but part 2 will have my final answer. You have my word there. Regardless, he still has classic good dad vibes. Supportive, warm, cheesy humor, you know the drill. Maybe to a fault. His goofy nature makes it difficult for him to be taken seriously, and he uses humor to cope with just about everything, which doesn't always land in difficult situations. This is also very much in line with his original character. Maybe he was just Peak all along and simply needed a new outfit. As I said before, Sai grew up in an orphanage with Vic, and they now have a happy-sad clown dynamic, with Sai being the happy clown. As I also said previously, Sylvester is the outward face of the circus when they are dealing with racist assholes. Victor doesn't really mind since he's really in it for the business and not really the fame, so he's perfectly happy to let Sylvester kind of take the limelight there. He doesn't actually make any of the final decisions, though. Victor values his input a lot, but honestly, a different character altogether ultimately has more sway than he does. More on that later. Yeah, that's just about it. I don't really have a lot of changes to talk about because I didn't make any. So, yeah. Moving right along to Nathan. So my biggest goal for him was to give him a tangible, defined personality. In all of my notes, drawings, everything, I could not for the life of you explain what kind of man this man was supposed to be. One drawing, he is looking trigger-happy and even a little malicious. The next, he is super serious and focused. One paragraph, he's super straight-laced and has his shit together. The next, he is smoking and lives in a crappy shithole apartment. That is on the rare occasion that there was a drawing or a paragraph about him at all. So this Nathan is a serious guy for sure. He has a clear vision for how things should be, and he will do his best to make sure that happens. However, he is also a very patient and caring person. He's probably the most down-to-earth of the new lineup, serving as the unofficial dad figure for everyone, including those that are older than him. In terms of story, he was drafted into World War I as a sniper and fought until he sustained a terrible injury and had to have his left leg amputated below the knee. His scrap with death was frightening, but it was scarier considering he didn't really have anybody around for him when he came back. His old job as a mechanic had been filled in his absence, and he couldn't find other work due to his disability and lack of education, and struggled with feelings of uselessness. That is, until he found a homeless little scrimblow named Tabby and took her in. They took good care of each other until they were both found by Vic, who sought out Nathan for his sharpshooting. Things went well for everybody for a long while, though an accident during a performance caused Nathan to eventually retire from performing. He now just hangs around as their mechanic. One thing that I really like about Nathan's new design is that he is in a wheelchair. It was something that I actually considered for his original design, and do have maybe 1 or 2 drawings of me trying it out, but I never really committed to it. It makes him stand out a lot in the lineup, but I also think that in combo with his dog tags, you really get a story from him immediately, even more so than you would with just looking at his scar. Also, he stands out in the grand lineup of all the characters in my brain. I didn't really realize it until I made the decision, but I don't really have a lot of characters that use wheelchairs. In all honesty, it's probably because wheelchairs are hard to draw and I'm not good at drawing them. Fun fact though, continuously avoiding a thing is not how you get better at drawing it actually, so I am forcing myself to now because it makes Nathan look really cool and extra badass. Besides, back in the early decades of the 1900s, wheelchairs were legit, like, normal-ass chairs that they attached wheels to, so that's all Nathan's wheelchair really needs to look like, and I can fudge it as much as I need. I just really like how he turned out. This is honestly one of the biggest improvements for me. Next is Tabby. Tabby, formerly Tommy, is no longer a ghost child, in case you haven't noticed. I'd reuse the joke about how that can just be Mina's thing again, but I guess that applies to Girl and Ghost as well. That time it's in the name, too. Anywho, Tabby is a little girl now instead of a little boy, but they dress him like a little boy because A, I imagine she's a tomboy and it just suits her better, and B, I just really like how it looked compared to all the dresses I saw references of, honestly. Also, in my head, it seemed kind of cute from a story standpoint, since, as I'll talk about later, the only other lady of the group wears a suit, and most of her other role models dress masculine too, so she just wants to fit in with her many parentals. Her story isn't very developed, but I honestly might keep it that way. I know that it's generally best practice to have something in mind, even if you're not going to tell it to the audience when it comes to backstory, but I just kind of like her being a mystery. She just showed up one day without explanation, got adopted by Nathan, and that's all you know about her. Maybe it'll be all I ever know about her. Her new life with her new folks is the important part anyways. I think I just like mystery scrimblows though. All I know is that her backstory has nothing to do with murder or other really depressing stuff. I want this to be a relatively happy scrimblow. She has that smile because she is happy and not because she's a strange Death the Killer knockoff. That's what I call character growth. For me. I actually have had a few people in my life now that I've told about this project just joke with me about how it's crazy this story actually has some wholesomeness now. Oh yeah, I don't have it in my notes, but I am quite sure I decided that I wanted Nathan to have formally adopted her as his daughter, both to harken back to the draft where Tommy was supposed to be Nathan's son, but also because I think it's very sweet. It's also great in the case of legal trouble, because they won't just automatically seize the scrimblow. Little safeguard in case I make there be trouble. The only other thing I want to note is that I decided on the last name of Finch because I honestly kind of imagined Tabby to share vibes with Scout from To Kill a Mockingbird, a character that was very influential to me as a person growing up. Overall, this was a shockingly easy redesign, and she just looks so cute and scrappy. Oh, I love her! Next is Charlie. Charlamagne the Great, the illusionist, the fortune teller, the stuck-up British bellend with a god complex. Oh, yes, he maintained every ounce of douchebaggery, and I love to hate him so. I wanted his color palette to be really muted, especially compared to the others, and very cool tone, which I feel like makes him stand out and maintain some of that original ice theming, even though he isn't an ice wizard anymore. I also contemplated chopping off all of his hair to fit with the trends of the 20s, but nah, his big messy bun has been so iconic to his design, I can't take that from him. As I implied before, I imagine him as one of those sideshows that does fortune-telling in his own little tent. He also sometimes does big illusions for the big tent and is very smug about how no one can figure out his tricks, even the people that work with him. However, he's often too elaborate with it to fit in the budget, plus listening to him gloat is annoying, so he usually stays with the fortune-telling thing since he is more profitable that way and everyone gets to eat. With fortune-telling, though, he is convinced that he actually has the ability to pierce the veil and see things from beyond. He is scarily accurate at reading people, though, and he's so good at it that the others in the cast occasionally get convinced too. The gist of his new story is that he actually used to be part of a very hoity-toity family and was studying to become a doctor. He came over from the UK to continue his studies, sent by his successful father. However, his father, whom he already had a rocky relationship with, died of tuberculosis while he was overseas. Turns out that, while his father was still funding his studies, he had been written out of the will as a final slight against him, and his siblings got control of his assets instead. The money stopped coming, Charlie was forced to drop out, and he was stranded in America with nothing but bitterness and loneliness. Worst of all, he had no access to good tea. It's tragic. He never stopped his scholarly pursuits, settled into a librarian job, and got very interested in the supernatural and magic. What a dork. He eventually crossed paths with Victor randomly, under circumstances I haven't written yet, but the important part is that he was promised good tea if he could bring his dramatic flair to the circus. Charlie finds the entire thing to be dignity-destroying, but he likes tea, so give and take. He is nasty, snarky, and absolutely nobody likes him. Even me. I hate him so much. He's such a little shit, and I love that about him. Charlie has always been that character that I just think sucks so bad, but he's so funny to write about, and I needed to keep that, and I did. Woo. Theo is next. Well, Theo, my goal was to just make this character actually have a personality and interesting design, so instead of being a shy, meek, weak little baby with no autonomy in a trench coat and a fedora that makes no sense for the character, I leaned into the few shining moments of ultimate sass towards Charlamagne and put them in weird formal attire. The freshly womaned Theodore, now Theodora, reminds me a lot of, like, Benny from New Vegas. I know that would make her from the 50s since that's closer to the aesthetics of the Fallout universe, but whatever. She has a fancy suit she insists isn't ugly, she talks fast, she's so self-interested, and she loves gambling. She works a sideshow where she exclusively uses her mastery of sleight of hand to rake in the dough. People come into her little tent to be tricked by a little Spitfire doll. Yeah, that's why she has the nickname she does. She takes advantage of people that think they can outsmart her little card tricks, but they can't. As such, she is one of the most profitable people because she's popular and doesn't need a lot of crazy setup to make her things work. And she is oh so smug about it, especially around Charlie because she hates that guy, but loves making his life a living hell. I decided that she's also English, specifically Irish, but ended up living closer to London in the UK. You know, it's funny because I consistently make my Irish characters have red hair, but none of my Irish family have red hair. We pretty much all have brown hair, the only exceptions leaning a bit more into the strawberry blonde than a straight up red. I am an enigma to myself. I have an idea that Theo was a runaway bride who ran so far away she got on a boat and left Britain to come to New York. I can't decide why she left exactly, but she's definitely really cagey about it. Maybe she was in with the British Mafia somehow. That fits her character. I do really like what I did with her design-wise. She looks like a perfect blend of cute and sly, small but still imposing, masculine and feminine. I think this actually works really well to make her a good foil with Charlie. She's a little lady that leans more masculine, and he's a big guy that leans more feminine. It's fun. Honestly, I don't have much more to say. She was such a nothing character originally, and now she's not, so mission accomplished. Oh, side note before I move on, I have kind of indicated a few times so far that one of the problems I've had with these characters was that they were more shy or that they were not very active, and I just wanted to add in a little disclaimer that there's nothing wrong with characters like that. I love Fluttershy, who I think this character was probably inspired by originally, and plenty of other characters that are super shy or weak or scared babies. Reserved characters aren't bad. I just personally tend to like them less than the louder characters since I relate to the louder ones more, and I don't like the reserved or shy characters at all when I write them like I did, which is to say they do literally nothing. Just don't want anyone thinking I hate my small bean characters. I don't. They are precious and wonderful. Mwah. That was beyond offensive. You were just sitting there staring at the water bottle, not drink. It's water time! It's water time! Everybody drink your water! My rat is drinking water. I'm drinking water. You gotta drink your water. I'm so fucking tired! We have arrived at the final pair. Almost done. So, Dawnfire, now Apollo, stage name, or Julius, legal name, was a really weird change, because unlike pretty much everybody else, I kept practically none of his original personality vibes or anything. The only thing that I really kept up was the fact that he has this big, grand persona, but he's concealing a much more quick-tempered underbelly, but that's kind of it. I mostly try to play on how Dawnfire and Nightfall were originally meant to be embodiments of day and night, respectively, so I wanted this new Dawnfire to be the personification of day. Big, bright, full of hustle and bustle, loud, warm, etc. So my idea for him was that he was kind of the first investor of the circus, meeting Vic randomly, maybe at a speakeasy bar where they got to chatting and Vic extended the offer to... No, wait, stop. That's copyrighted by Disney, you can't do that. Anyways, because he was the first investor, he actually gets a pretty good say in the business end, but he is very, very easily persuaded by Victor, because Victor's just a sweet talker. This Julius guy is part of this really wealthy, old money family. Very used to the finer things, loves trophy hunting and eating caviar and traveling abroad, hates poor people, and yeah, mostly just poor people. Just a real bastard guy. However, because he is the youngest and generally least favored of his brothers, a family scandal got pinned on him. His complicated parents still pay him under the table, mostly so he keeps quiet for the betterment of the family, though they assure him it's out of love. However, publicly, he is completely dissociated from the family. He joined the circus because of Victor's sweet-talking, and as time has gone on, he's actually kind of grown a bit, and he will continue to as the story goes on. His character, in my mind, is very similar to Charles Emerson Winchester III from MASH, if you know that show. And if you don't, you should. It's honestly pretty based, especially from the time period. Really good war commentary, and the characters are pretty great. Honestly, I may need to make a video essay about that show one day. That's a good idea. Anyways, Charles is a really stuck-up asshole, but he does still really care about the people around him and makes sacrifices, albeit reluctantly when he needs to. And that's what I want this Apollo Julius guy to be. I love the rich asshole with a golden heart type of trope because usually in real life, rich assholes don't grow as people and only become richer assholes, which is terrible for everyone. Because capitalism. I like to sometimes imagine a better world in fiction. I ended up with the name Apollo because, as I said before, I was trying to maintain some of the sun and moon, day and night theming in the new names for Dawnfire and Nightfall. Plus, a stuck-up, self-obsessed god like Sunboy definitely fits with the new aesthetics. I also leaned into their original creature-y theming by making them the circus animal handlers, with Apollo specifically handling large beasts like lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Speaking of bears, the only thing in my mind while I was making his character design was Clayton from Tarzan and make him a bear. His original designs were always supposed to be big and hairy, so I tried to keep it while also making him look like a man who thinks he is way fancier than he actually is. I honestly really liked how he turned out. It's a very different vibe from what I normally do in terms of character approach, and also sets him apart from everyone else. Oh, also, he's the oldest person here. I just thought that was funny. It's not really important, but, you know, just a note. Finally, one more to go. Nightfall, now Noir, stage name, or Marion, legal name. Theirs was the most fun redesign, to be honest, and it was a really neat history lesson in some ways. Nightfall was always a character who never seemed to have much of an identity outside of Mortem or even Dawnfire, so my goal was to really push myself in a different direction and make this redesign stand out from the pack, which I honestly wanted to do for both Dawnfire and Nightfall since they hung out with the mortal folk but still looked very different from the rest of them in their original incarnations. It was mostly the wings. Also, as I said before, I wanted to lean into the fact that they were kind of meant to be personifications of day and night, and I don't really get that from the OG Nightfall. That might be because OG Nightfall was actually originally inspired by Sombra and not Luna, but shush. Anyways, rather than being big and angry and rude, I think it makes much more sense for a personification of night to be dark and subdued in colors and themes, but still beautiful. Quiet, shy to reflect the peace of night, but still holding the potential for sinister intent. For some reason, this made me think of a moody alt-teen. Marion is this reserved, standoffish person with a very slow, quiet, and deliberate way of speaking. Did you really just yawn me, dog? Don't look at me all cute. You're being a bastard. Marion is this reserved, standoffish person with a very slow, quiet, and deliberate way of speaking. They're kind of a mysterious person and are hard to really get excited or riled up, usually acting apathetic towards the others. Except for Victor, who, as I said before, is actually their father. I don't know why I thought of this. It was kind of a later decision that has nothing to do with the OG characters, like, at all. I just thought it would be interesting if Victor actually got to be a dad, and it would explain why Marion has been with the circus in such a young age, with their act being all about taming scary reptiles and creepy crawlies. I imagine that Marion and Victor have a really wholesome bond, which is nice. Also, if it wasn't clear from me using gender-neutral language for Marion, I decided they would be non-binary, because I got really inspired looking at 1920s non-binary fashion. The 1920s saw the rise of androgynous fashion in general, particularly in high society, and these looks actually took inspiration, or frankly were appropriating, queer culture and, conveniently for me, circus freak shows from the time period. I felt like having an actual queer character in my own circus freak show, dressed in an outfit inspired by that stuff, is just kind of a cool full circle moment. I don't know. I really liked how androgynous that Marion there turned out, though. Also unimportant, but I love the name Marion a lot, and I'm glad that I'm finally using it for a character. And finally, at long last, I am done yapping about these fucks. For now, anyways. Like I said before, I am going to be doing a part 2 to this video, so more yapping about these guys is on its way. And hey, while you're still here, why not let you in on what that's all about? See, as I said before, like way too long ago now, these guys were technically my first characters I ever made comics of consistently. As such, I felt it was only right to actually, you know, make a comic with them, but better with my newfound understanding of how comics work. I felt that it was a great idea, especially since I have a lot of people asking for advice about making comics, or for a video kind of like my character design tips video, just for comic making. Instead of me just talking at you about my process, I'll be walking you through it, step by step, while evolving these guys further. It will be a lot of work, and I have no clue when that will be out, considering I've barely even thought about thumbnailing at the current date of my script writing, and I probably still won't have done much work by the time this video goes up. However, I have a lot of fun ideas for it. I think it will make for an interesting watch, and I have some other stuff in the works in the meantime, so stay tuned. Or don't, that's fine too. No hard feelings. Take care of yourself. If that means literally never listening to me talk again, that's okay. Still, thank you for watching, genuinely. This took a really long time to make. This is actually my second time recording this audio because the first version got, well, borked, shall we say. I hope all the work paid off and that this was fun. Also, while I like how everything turned out, I'd also like to hear what you all think. Are there things you would have done differently, or maybe even ideas that might help me fill in the story gaps I haven't quite patched up yet? Are you excited for a part 2? I always like reading the comments, so I'm excited to see everyone's thoughts on this. If you had fun, I would really appreciate if you would consider sharing with a friend, though maybe sending them something over an hour is a little daunting. Oops. It might be saying shit like this at the end of all my videos, but the growth of this channel continues to blow me away. I made a community post recently asking how to celebrate 20k, which is still unreal to me, and people seem to like the idea of a Q&A, so if you guys like that idea, please feel free to leave some questions in the comments on this video, or even go back to the community post. Honestly, I'd rather you go to the community posts because it's easier for me to see them and organize everything, but that is a bit inconvenient for you, so you know, I'll try my best to catch a question wherever you put it, but your chances are probably better over on the community tab. Anything you want to know, fair game, but just please be respectful of the fact that I prefer to be faceless and nameless online, and also that I am a person. So far so good with the questions. Great, very respectful, sweet questions, but I have seen artists do things like that where people take the opportunity to get a little too personal. Anyways, I'll let you go. Thank you again for setting this one out. I hope you had a good time. Take some deep breaths, drink some water, and most importantly, remember that you matter. Bye! Stop bullying your sister. She's very gentle with you because you're blind and you're taking advantage of her gentle nature. That is inappropriate and it is rude. I'm just gonna have like a solid minute of me just waiting for my dumb rats. They're not dumb rats, they're smart rats. Well, they might be dumb rats. They're not dumb, but they might be dumb as far as rats go.